Happy Valentine's Day. Welcome to A Safe Place, a podcast where we discuss school gun violence and how to keep kids safe in schools. I am your host, Louis Aponte. I am the author of the upcoming books, A Safe Place, How to Prevent the Next School Shooting, and the Ultimate U.S. School Shooting Reference Guide. This is episode 13, and today is a special day. It's more than just a day in which we run out the last minute, buy some flowers, a card, perhaps some gourmet chocolates for that special someone. Not me, of course, because if you look at the corner of my screen, I decided to get flowers a day early because I I don't like fighting crowds, and I didn't want to buy just what's left. I only want to get the best quality flowers for my wife because she deserves it. Valentine's Day is not just about the flowers, though. It's also a day of reflection. And just like many other holidays, I mean, you think about it, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Mother's Day, Father's Day. It's a day to remind us to pause and to think about all the people that we love in our lives. It's a reminder to give them a call because it's been way too long since you last checked up on them. I'm totally guilty of that. I try to call my parents at least every other weekend. Every weekend, sometimes it's a challenge, but I try my best. Perhaps Valentine's Day is a reminder to give unfeigned love and to be genuinely attentive to other people. I mean, you never know how much a small gesture of love can not only brighten someone's day, but maybe even save a life. And that is not an exaggeration. The simple act of showing someone that you care about them can save a life. And I can tell you that from personal experience. Today, for many people in South Florida, Valentine's Day 2024 is the sixth anniversary of the Parkland mass shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School. On this day, 6 years ago, while teenagers were exchanging Valentine's Day cards and giving flowers to their loved ones, a 19-year-old former student arrived at the school in Uber around 2:19 p.m., armed with a legally purchased AR-15 semi-automatic rifle. Now, according to reports, the attack lasted for less than 4 minutes, leaving 17 kids and teachers dead and 17 more injured. By 2:28 p.m., he ditched his rifle and blended in with the students who were trying to escape. And for the next 3.5 years, I studied every known school shooting from January 1990 to January 2020. I wanted to help find evidence-based patterns and solutions that might help prevent the next school shooting and save the lives of children. As a result, multiple patterns and ideas did emerge, and I eventually got to meet some amazing and inspiring people that have been fighting for years to achieve the same goal. One incredible person and nonprofit organization that is making a great difference in schools is Mr. Scott LoMurray. He's the CEO of Sources of Strength, an organization that provides evidence-based training for youth and adults to promote mental health and prevent adverse outcomes such as suicide, violence, bullying, and substance abuse. Now, I must apologize ahead of time because I had a list of questions that I wanted to ask him. However, Mr. LoMurray answered them so thoroughly and so well that I wasn't able to ask some of my follow-up questions because he would end up repeating himself. So as a result, I struggled a little bit to come up with questions, follow-up questions, but I hope you'll forgive me. And just like in my previous interviews, I feel that this is incredibly important to share this with you, the life-saving work of Sources of Strength and what they're doing for young people. Welcome, Mr. LoMurray.
Hi, yeah, thanks so much for having me.
So glad you can meet me on. I know you've had a very busy like winter season in general, so thank you for joining me. So before I begin, I have to say that I absolutely loved your profile description on your website. It's probably the most likable description for a CEO I've ever read. I mean, is it true that
Okay.
your favorite hobby is growing facial hair at an incredible rate?
Yeah, it's I work hard at it.
Yeah, I'm jealous. I can't grow a proper beard. It goes like right here, and then just it won't grow on the sides properly. I tried it once. My wife's like, please get rid of that. Uh, so here it is. So in my one of my previous podcasts, the reason why I was able to find you and heard about your organization, I don't know if you got to meet Miss Claire Marie. She's a school emergency management expert and children's book author.
Okay, I don't know if we've had a chance to meet in person together.
Okay, no worries. Well, she indicated that she wished all schools had an organization like yours to provide evidence-based resources for like mental health promotion and prevention of adverse outcomes such as suicide. And so, I mean, these are very important topics to me. I often hear politicians talk about mental health, as part of their talking points, but you almost never hear anyone mentioning anything about evidence-based solutions and how they plan to act. So, like, what inspired? I guess I mean I know you've been with the organization for quite some time. What inspired your organization to take this unique approach?
Yeah. It was really out of a response to seeing some of the gaps that we were seeing in kind of the prevention space. And so Sources of Strength was actually founded by my dad, Mark LoMurray.
Oh wow.
So I always joke that you're looking at the face of nepotism here. But I was the second employee at Source of Strength. I've been here for 16 years. And so we've really built up the organization together over the years. And so, but he had been the director of the Police Youth Bureau in
Mhm.
Bismarck, North Dakota, which did a lot of crisis intervention work. And at that time, North Dakota had some of the highest teen suicide fatality rates.
Mhm.
Um, and as a part of that job, he was involved in a lot of crisis response work and intervention work and really working to support young people and their families and their communities. And over about a 3 year span of time, he went to dozens of funerals of teenagers. And some of
Wow.
those were drunk driving accidents, and some of those were accidental drug overdoses, and quite a
Mhm.
few of those were suicide deaths. And he really walked away from that experience with a pretty profound sense that we could do more to get ahead of the issue, that everything felt pretty reactionary and it felt pretty crisis driven. And a lot of the energy was really focused on, well, how do we intervene in that crisis moment in somebody's
Right.
life? How do we see, talking about risk factors and warning signs and identifying, those things and trying to give people the help that they need and deserve, which is obviously incredibly important, but really had a vision for, well, how do we get ahead of that issue? How do we get ahead of
Right.
that crisis? And really work to shift culture and norms around help seeking, but also around resiliency and around strength and around protective factors and these things that help us, um, both navigate the ups and downs and twists and turns and difficult things of life. But when we do get knocked down, to get back up and to be able to move through that, and also to help each other do that. And so that's kind of the genesis, the vision behind the very beginning of Sources of
Mhm.
Strength was really just a vision of thinking about how do we move upstream, how do we get ahead. Of some of these issues to really try to focus on well-being and connection and these things that we know are going to be protective in preventing the very onset of something like suicidality or violence,
Right.
or substance abuse or things like that.
That's amazing. So he had years of experience to draw upon in order to try to kind of identify the holes that you mentioned before. And so versus, I guess, whenever there's a mass, a big tragedy, yeah, you're right. There is a lot of like, we need to respond right now. So it doesn't sound like there's a whole lot of, research based or evidence based or just personal experience based to really tackle these issues. Does that sound about accurate?
Yeah, I think sometimes in particular, I think with what you're mentioning, when there is a loss or there is some sort of event or
Especially
crisis
when it gets media attention.
that might hit the community, yeah, there can sometimes be a little bit of a frenzy effect around activity. And well, let's just run all these programs, or let's do all these interventions, or let's,
Right.
this flurry of activity, which, I think we need to be strategic about what kind of activities and what kind of strategies we're employing in kind of that postvention response type of scenario to make sure that it is healing and helpful, and is trauma informed, and there's a lot to consider around how are we responding like appropriately to different groups of people, because
Right.
people have different exposure to that event and they might need different types of support and intervention. But what we work on is, we definitely do help when there is a crisis or there is a loss, in kind of a postvention space. And we think that our model can be a really helpful asset and tool in that space. But so much more of our time is on truly prevention, right? Like how do we prevent that thing from happening in the
Right.
first place? And really trying to embrace a more proactive and kind of public health oriented model, so that we can really drive down some of these rates at a more population level, rather than just kind of at a more individual level, which I think is sometimes the way that we're tackling it.
would you say your program is more, I guess, like long-term, based versus just an immediate response, just to make sure they stay alive? I mean, is there like an ongoing, kind of check up on them to see how they're doing and dealing with whatever hardships that are going on in their life?
Yeah, our model is I would say it's much more of like a community, like thinking about the if you're familiar with like the socio-ecological model, there's kind of the
Hmm.
individual and then the relational and then family and community. And so our program is much more designed, certainly to have an individual impact, but it's delivered with kind of a public health focus in mind around how are we actually shifting the culture of a school or of a community.
Hmm.
How are we actually creating communities of strength and well-being? How are we creating a more protective and safe environment? And so yes, the model is one. It's designed to be a sustainable, all of those things I just mentioned, right?
Right,
Doing culture change initiatives and how are we shifting, these things that takes time. It doesn't happen
right,
overnight. It doesn't happen from an assembly. It doesn't happen from like one PowerPoint, or a lesson.
right.
It is a sustained initiative of creating and building towards health and well-being and resiliency in communities. And our program is designed to train people on how to, at the local level,
Yeah,
training adult advisors and peer leaders, how to really use their voice and leverage their power and their influence to make that reality. So it's coming in as like an outside uh, speaker or expert or
yeah,
what have you, we can have a little bit of impact, but we can't have very sustained impact.
right.
And where that really starts to be sustainable and scalable is when it's happening at the local level and local leaders using their voice and their relationships and their connection to really build that kind of world and build that kind of community.
Yeah.
And so our model is really designed to train and equip and empower that process, and then really to sustain that process and that work over years, over decades,
Right.
ideally.
And you said when
Uh,
you like say I understand you partner with a number of schools, is that correct?
we do, yeah, we work
You
with
do.
thousands of
And
schools.
and you're not just training I imagine you're not just training teachers and the counselors, you're also training the students to be peers, is that correct?
Yeah, so we have an elementary program and model, and we have a secondary model. And so they're a little bit different in terms of those approaches. At elementary, it's more of a universal, like classroom-based curriculum
It's
that
amazing.
where students are learning about these things and engaging in that. At the secondary level, we are training a group of caring, connected, positive adult advisors, but also a group of influential peer leaders of students within that school and community, and really trying to get a diverse subset of those students, a really representative sampling kind of the young people in that community. And then we are training that adult advisor team and that peer leader team in our model because we really recognize that if we're going to move the needle in a high school, we have to have high school students involved,
Yeah,
right? That if we're going to shift culture,
right.
if we're gonna make thinking those things, that young people have to be at the driving force of that. Otherwise, it's really going to lack power. It's really going to lack impact. And so that is, one of the main core components of our model is that it is really a peer-led initiative with young people at the core of it.
That's amazing. Now, do you find that need because on your website, I believe you mentioned that there's no one size fits all. So I mean, you're interacting with these kids, you're interacting with teens and adults. Is does that evolve with the feedback you get from the people that you're training?
Yeah, so there's a few different dynamics at play there. One is we want to have a responsive, like adaptable program that's going to meet the needs of the community that we're in, right? And so there's very small, tiny little schools, and there's ginormous schools, and you might need to tailor your strategy a little bit in terms of how you're implementing this or how you're delivering this. Or you might have communities that have experienced different kinds of things or have different priorities, or dynamics at play. And so we want to be responsive and adaptable to really meet the needs of the room and the community that we're in, while also having an evidence-based model that we want to deliver with fidelity, to that evidence base to make sure that we're having the outcomes that we want to see. And so, we have a training that we offer that will flex to kind of meet some of the circumstances and needs of the school, but also try to make sure that we're delivering that training to a fidelity standard. And then we have kind of the subsequent campaigns and activities and public health strategies that school and those teams might be running, and a lot of flexibility baked into the model to really respond to like the leadership of that team to say,
Right.
hey, here's what we think is going to be effective. Here's what my friends are going to pay attention to, or here's the issues that we want to speak to. And we have tools and resources to help support and equip the team to do that. But also part of the model is really to empower their voice to come up with those ideas because they are the local experts. They
Right.
are the people that know what's going on the ground in their community. And so that's part of the program design is to really create space for that flexibility and to really tailor kind of the delivery, the implementation for each community.
That's perfect. And I imagine you are very persistent as far as following up, see what's working, see what's not working. Can you, based on all your years of experience, are there any stories or even just a single story um, or an example that stands out in your mind as far as how your program maybe helped save a life or multiple lives?
Yeah, there's a lot, like I said, I'm in my 16th year in this work.
It's amazing.
And so I think there's a lot of stories that come to mind and some of them are some of them are more intense where there's somebody who is really in like an acute crisis and a friend was able to get them connected to help because they saw a part of our, they were in our training or they had created that culture in the school where adults could be trusted and students knew that asking for help was a sign of being a good friend or asking for help for yourself is a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness. And so we have, a lot of stories of that of people who are struggling and they find the courage to ask for help or that they know their friend is struggling and they finally feel like they know how they can be helpful towards them. But then there's also a lot of stories where you just hear stories around increasing a sense of connectedness or a sense of like feeling like you belong or feeling like you're a part of something, you're included, feeling safe, feeling like you know what to do with like these big feelings and emotions that
Yeah,
we experience that are just, they're human emotions and they can be really overwhelming. And sometimes in life we can go through really hard things. And so we have a lot of stories of people just recognizing and learning that they have strength, that they have people in their lives that they can go to, that they have coping strategies that are healthy. And so we see a lot of those things where it might not be as profound as, hey, we made this intervention and saved a life, but I think in a very real way still might have saved a life. One small example that's coming to mind is I was training at a school several years ago out here in Colorado, and we talk about gratitude as like as an example of a strategy that we can deploy that is good for us. And there's a lot of research around
right.
how practicing gratitude can really help our mental health and it can help build resiliency. And so we were sort of talking about this idea of keeping a gratitude practice and a gratitude journal. And like there's research to show that if you write down 3 new things you're grateful for every day for 21 days, like the physical chemical makeup of your brain starts to change and your brain starts to scan your environment for the good. So
That's amazing.
anyway, we were in this school and I had been in the school the year before and talked about this idea of practicing gratitude and keeping like a gratitude journal. And then in this training, a high school senior came up to me and she said, hey, I started doing that after our training last year. And she proceeded to tell me the story about how she'd been keeping this gratitude journal. And her boyfriend of 3 years broke up with her earlier that year.
Wow.
And she said, this is some high school relationships, it's like, whew, out of that one. And some
Yeah,
are heartbreaking. And this was
yeah,
the heartbreaking kind.
Right.
And she tells me the story about how she's laying in bed that night, crying her eyes out, really feeling brokenhearted. And she said, out of habit, I leaned over to my gratitude journal and I just started flipping through page after page after page of things that I'd said I was grateful for. And I picked up my pen and I wrote down three things that I was still grateful for. And she said, I realized in that moment that I was going to be okay. And I
That's so
think about
powerful.
that, like it's a simple thing, but like that in her darkest moment, she found hope, and she found it from within. She found it in herself, and so it's just a small example, um, that I think is it's that counts. That's a
That
part.
that's powerful, and it's such great wisdom to have. And I imagine that that person she will probably take that into her adulthood as well as a coping strategy. And who knows how many other people she might influence in a positive way. I think I have a journal that I keep as well, and I try to focus on things that I'm grateful for, especially when things are getting bad. And it's such a great habit, and I didn't realize that there's all these. I mean, you always hear about it from motivational speakers, focus on what's positive, and but when you actually put it into practice, it really does help, and I
And
think
I
that's
think
wonderful.
it's a delicate balance, right? Because we
Yes,
don't like tip into toxic positivity where we're just saying like, oh, like, it's just rose-colored glasses, just don't pay attention to things that are hard. But it's actually acknowledging that, like, there are hard things, and that's okay. And then, but also leaning into what helps.
right,
And I think spending more time thinking about what, as a field in public health and in prevention, we spend a lot of time talking about and discussing the leading causes of death and how to prevent them, and like what are
mm,
those factors, and we need to spend more time exploring the leading causes of life, right? And
right,
what are the things that help people to really be well, and to be healthy. And that's a phrase that I actually borrowed from, oh, I think it's Gary Gunderson.
okay, okay.
So I don't want to I don't want
No,
to
no, that's brilliant.
credit the leading causes of life to myself, but it's a beautiful concept,
Right,
that I think is a big part of what we're trying to do at Sources of Strength is really focus on what are those leading causes of life. And at Sources, our vision, our mission isn't just to keep people alive, it's to help people really live a healthy life. And
right,
our vision is to empower a well world that, wellness, well-being is the goal, and prevention is an outcome of that goal.
right.
And that's really what we're trying to work towards.
I think a lot. I imagine a lot of kids, when they're going through whatever serious crisis that they're going through, they think they're the only one going through it. But I find that a lot of adults are struggle with those what might be considered a simple emotion. Um, this is a little bit personal, but I have a sister. She was a special needs teacher, and not this past Halloween, but the Halloween before that, she committed suicide with a gun. And I had no idea that she was struggling through whatever it is she was struggling with. It was something that was at home, but here she was a teacher, and for special needs students. And if she had these strategies, if she was willing to open up and to acknowledge the emotions that she was going through, and focus on the things that she should be great, that were going well in her life, because she was about to be a grandmother in 6 months. She just got a new house. She just got a new car, and like all these. I mean, and granted, those are just material things, but she had family that really cared about her, and that strategy that you mentioned that you gave to that girl that she's going to take for the rest of her life. I think that's very powerful. I think it's wonderful that there's organizations like yours doing that. Um, Let me ask you, continuing on this conversation, I know we only have about 5 minutes left. Does your program involve creating new laws or an act of Congress?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you, Lewis, for sharing that story.
Mm,
I'm really sorry for your loss.
thank you.
What was your sister's name?
Her name is Michelle.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
Um, so your question was, do we help kind of like do lobbying and advocacy work?
right. Because I know you help at a community level, and you help them sustain themselves and everything. But does your program involve introducing any new laws, for example, that in terms of changing the strategy in which, because you hear a lot of these politicians every time there's an election, oh, we have to deal with mental health, or there's a mass school shooting, and so it's really a mental health issue. It's like, okay, well, what are you doing about it? So I'm wondering, since you have a proven track record of evidence-based training, have you ever tried to petition for new laws in terms of the way schools address mental health?
Yeah, so that's it's not like a core part of our work in terms of doing like more lobbying or kind
Hmm.
of advocacy work directly in terms of like helping say, hey, this is the law that we want to see passed.
Right.
But we are definitely involved both at kind of local levels with communities where we have our program running, and kind of at the national level in terms of some advocacy to say, well, one, we need more funding
Hmm.
in the mental health space, in the prevention space, in the upstream prevention space in particular. And so, a lot of times we're working on we help communicate that, or if we're invited in by a local partner, to do some advocacy work as well. And so, I would say it's not like a part of our kind of core mandate,
Got it.
or um, core work, but it is something that we are involved in. We've been to the Capitol and been to the White House, helping think through,
Okay.
how we can have more effective prevention strategies. We've been involved in helping craft the previous national suicide prevention strategy. We have staff members
That's
that
it.
sit on national task forces and local working groups, on those things. And so like we are involved in it.
Okay.
But I would say it's not, like we're maybe not the trailblazers in that regard.
Right, right. I have a suspicion, but is it partially because there is no one size fits all? Because back in what was it? Is it the 80s or the 90s when they had the DARE program, the drug prevention program, and they got a lot of funding, from the government. I imagine there was a lot of lobbying going on there. But I suspect that they used the same strategy for every school that they went to. For example, is that part of the reason why you're not lobbying at all? Because it can't be a set static thing.
I mean, I personally believe that sources of strength, that our model can be helpful
Hmm.
pretty much everywhere. I
Okay.
don't think it like uniformly works the same way
Right.
everywhere, but I
Hmm.
think like the principles, the concepts, the foundation, and I think we're trying to learn as an organization. Like we know that it's less effective in certain places, and that, there's certain communities that have a hard time getting it off the ground because it is a model that you got to run. Like you got to,
Right.
it takes some effort, it takes some time, and there's a lot of under-resourced communities that might have a harder time creating that space and creating that time, and
Hmm.
or have other things that they're trying to navigate. So we're trying to learn and grow as an organization. We never
Okay.
feel like we have a finished program or product, but that um, we're always trying to kind of improve based on both what we're seeing in the field, what we're learning through our research. Um, but I also don't think it would work for the edict to just come down on high. Everybody has to do this one program because there
Right.
has to be buy-in.
Right.
There has to be, some local, will to work on that, and this has to be the model that feels like it's going to work for you. And so we never feel like we're trying to like sell the program,
Right.
to a community if it's not a good fit. We would rather they didn't do it, because we don't
Right.
want to cause harm, and we want it to be we want it to be helpful. We want it to be successful. But at the same time, like I think the we've learned a lot about how we fund prevention and public health, and like just funding one program versus funding strategies and
Right.
communities and helping communities think through what they want. But we do have some evidence to suggest that implemented at scale, this could be a really effective model in both working towards well-being, but also preventing deaths, preventing attempts.
Right.
And so I would love to see more funding to do that at scale,
Right.
and be able to
And I
Um,
appreciate your honesty. I appreciate you, being honest that it may or may not work, everywhere. But this is something that you're right. It does require individual involvement and just volunteering to do it instead of being forced to do it. I appreciate that perspective. So thank you. This is we're reaching the end of our interview. I just wanted to ask you one final question for any parents, teachers, or researchers that might be listening to this podcast. Where can they go if they want to find out more information about your organization?
yeah, they can just go to sourceofthestrength.org.
Okay, great. Well, Scott, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for taking the time to meet with me. I know you've been incredibly busy this past season, and I hope I get to follow up with you again if anything new is on the horizon, any new strategies, or wherever it is that you decide to take this organization maybe to the next generation. You know.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Lewis. And it was great to chat with you. And thanks for all the
Likewise.
work that you're doing.
Thank you so much. You have a great day. Take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye bye.